we were little children, we had a police dog, and that's all we had. We didn't have much more. And anyway, somebody stole this dog, and we were all crying, all four children. We loved this dog. He was just beautiful and so smart. One night there was a terrible, terrible rainstorm. He came crashing through the door. He came home to us after being away for a month. And he had a big rope around his neck that he broke to get back to us. And we were the happiest children that anybody could be.
Because I like rainstorms.
I am Aaron, and I'm supposed to talk about my childhood. I was born in Poland, in a town called Lutz. Actually, the Polacks call it Łódź, but it's very hard to pronounce. So when other people usually use the German name, it was founded by Russians and Germans in Poland about 150 years ago, because there was a mill and there was water power there, and they created a textile factory. By the time I was born, which was 1948, there were about 200 factories there, hundreds of them, and they all have big, high brick chimneys, and they all burned coal because they created steam to run the machines. They were very old-fashioned factories, even by then in 1948. When I was about 6 years old, we went in the winter to the mountains. We went to the mountains almost every winter because my father could afford it. He was buying wool in the black market and selling ready-made cloth on the black market. There was plenty of cloth sold legally, but it was a very low quality, and my father was stickler for quality, and his business was good at the time. Later he went to jail for it, but that's another story, because this was during the communist government. Well, both my parents were big on responsibility. They wanted always to teach me responsibility. And in their opinion, no age was too early to begin. So when I started talking, and before I knew how to count, they gave me a bill of 10 zloty and sent me to the newspaper stand to buy a newspaper while they were watching. I took the 10 zloty and I went to the stand and asked the vendor, a newspaper please, because I was polite even then. And he gave me a newspaper and gave me a change. And then a boy came to meet me. And that boy was a very big boy, maybe he was 12 or so. Said, "Are you sure that you got the right amount of money back? Did you get the correct change?" I said, "Oh yeah, the guy is okay." Say, "Are you sure? Let me count it." He took my money and he counted it. My parents were watching me from a distance. And then I came to them, gave them the change that I had and the newspaper and say, what did this boy want? Say, oh, he wanted to count the change to see if I got the correct change. Yeah, he counted it. He also took some for himself. Well, there was my first encounter with dishonesty, because my parents were very honest and very decent, and I didn't know that people like that even existed. Well, I guess it's good to learn about those things in a very early age.
My name is Sal, and I have an accent because I was born in Argentina, in a small town that was very anti-Semitic. I was from a family of Jewish people. I was the older son, and I was taught by my parents never to be ashamed of being Jewish. One day in the school, one child said that he wanted to kill a Jew. I forgot to tell you that when I went to school, I crossed over places where it was written, be a patriot, kill a Jew. When this kid, his name was Miguel, said that he wanted to kill a Jew, I said, I am a Jew. Try to kill me. Then the children said, you cannot fight in the school. After school, we went outside of the school, and all the children in the class made a round ring, and we began to fight. We fought for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, till somebody had blood coming from his nose. I don't remember if it was my nose or it was his nose. But at this point in which there was blood, we considered that the fight was over. We shook hands and we went home. And it was an interesting thing that I became a friend of the kid that wanted to kill a Jew, because we were two Argentinian kids, and it was important in Argentina that if one challenges the other, we needed to fight. There was no possibility of not fighting. But once we fought, we could become friends. That's the story.
My name is Maya, and I chose my story because the moral of the story, which I thought was that people of different religions can come together, is important.
I think I've always told stories, but not officially. So this is my first official story. I was very fortunate to grow up in a time and place that was wonderful for children. We had our own street. We all moved there when the old ones, the oldies, were 8. The young ones, the little ones we used to call them, were younger. They were 5. They couldn't play with the old ones who were special. But we all went out to play. When we first moved there were no sidewalks, so it was muddy streets. But sidewalks came very quickly, and the streets came very quickly. and we took over. There was no such thing as trying to come down to 15th Street with a car when we were outside playing. They just had to stop, wait for the inning to be over because we were playing stickball, and wait until we could move out of the way. In the winter time, there was one big hill, and that was on 69th Avenue. And when it was snowing, we took over that street too. We were very fortunate. There were a bunch of us all in a row, and we became very good friends. I still have friends from that time. That's 1950 for those of you who want to count. And we see each other as much as we can at least once a year and keep in touch and have a very special relationship. One of the people who's actually the husband of one of the friends said, we can't hide anything from each other because we know each other so well. The friendships that we had were remarkable and very special and very hard to find again. But this is how I thought kids grew up. And then I had my own daughter. And there weren't kids around where I lived. And she didn't have a street of her own. And she didn't have anything close to what I had. And I remember talking to my mother one day and saying, I feel badly because she doesn't have friends. My mother said, Susan, she has friends. She just doesn't have what you had. What you had was something beyond special.
Grandma and Grandpa, my mother, myself, my aunt, and my cousins would take a bungalow in a bungalow colony north of New York, probably about 3 hours north of New York, in the Catskill Mountains. It was a way to get away from the city and enjoy the country. Grandma and Grandpa's favorite thing to do when we were in the country was to go blueberry picking. They called the blueberries jagodis, which is actually a Polish word. And they looked forward every day to go into the hills and pick blueberries. We had so many blueberries that Grandma didn't know what to do with them. Sometimes she made a pie. Sometimes we ate the blueberries with cottage cheese. But when we were tired of that, Grandma took all the blueberries and boiled them in water like you would make applesauce. She would put sugar in the blueberries, and sometimes we would have it for dessert after dinner. Well, many nights we had jagodis, blueberries, as dessert after dinner. And myself and my cousins would eat the blueberries. After dinner, we would go outside to play with the other kids. There was usually a playground area, but nothing much else. Well, when we went outside, the other kids ran away from us night after night, and we could not figure out why. Finally, they said to us, "What is wrong with you guys? Your teeth are always blue." And then, of course, we explained to them that Grandma made this wonderful dessert for us every night. That is my story. I would like to tell you that Grandma, in particular, was a very loving, warm, quiet kind of woman. I remember watching her when we were in the bungalow every night, brushing her long gray hair and putting it in a bun every day. She barely spoke English, but I knew that she was a loving person.
I'm Kailani, and I chose this story because I like blueberries.
My childhood was different. Was brought up not to call attention to ourselves, not to feel pretty, not to feel special. And that was okay because that's what we knew. When I was in 4th grade, I had a teacher who liked me. And she liked me so well, I became the teacher's pet. So I had special privileges. She brought me special little goodies and things like that. One day she asked me if I would go with her to a show and to dinner. I couldn't believe it. Me? She was asking me to go to dinner and a show? I was 10. This is 1961. Well, she spoke to my parents, and they must have met her because they weren't the kind of people that would let you go with just anyone. And she took me to dinner. I don't remember where, but we had a great time. But we went to Jones Beach Theater, which is an outside theater on the island. And the show was, the music was Bally High. What's the name of the show? South Pacific. Well, I can still hear Bally High. And I just couldn't believe how special I was that I got to see this show on the outside with this teacher who actually liked me. So the rest of the year was beautiful. And unfortunately, you graduate 4th grade, you go to 5th grade. I wasn't the teacher's pet anymore for 5th grade, but a memory that will always, always stay with me. And every time I hear Bally High, I think of Miss Presti.
My name is Bilha Raun, and I will celebrate soon my 87th birthday. And I live now an independent living in Sinai residence. As you hear me, you know, you can recognize I have an accent. And it is because I came from a faraway country. And my story will be very different. It is a story that comes from a faraway country in a small village where I was born, in Israel. That is a Jewish state far away in the Middle East. And my story will be about something that is very important to me and affected my life, all my life. In the little village called Yarkona, where I grew up, there were like only 35 families, and it was a beautiful place with many orange groves and apple trees, and daffodils will be growing up during the time of the winter, and almond trees. And across from my home, there was a place where they were digging out for a water tower. And as they were digging for the water tower, suddenly they saw some kind of a sandstone rock that seemed to be fashioned in a very special way. And as kids, we all gather around and say, let's dig it out. What is this? And all of us, there were 5, 6 of us, were at that time, we were 9, 10 years old, and we come with little shovels and we dig, and every time after we finish our other game or school, we will come to dig the stone, and we cannot get to the bottom of it. And from 4th grade to 5th and 6th grade, we still did not get to the bottom of the stone. And we sat around it and we started to say, what could it be? And Zvika would say, I think I know what. It came from a faraway star. This is probably a meteor. This is a faraway star that came out a piece right here and ended up in Yarkona. And and Matityahu said, no, I think it's something else. It looks to me like it was an altar where maybe the idol worshippers, used to sacrifice on it. And he will tell all kind of stories, how he will think they will dance and what they will do to put a sacrifice on this altar. But little Tamar, she was the younger, she was really my age, and Tamar said, you know what I think? It was maybe a memorial for some very important people. While the time passed, we went to high school and to Tel Aviv and other places, and younger generation came to dig. And in 1948, there was a big war. And all of us, those of us, we were 18 years old, 17 years old, 18, 19, we all went to war. And when the war was over, most of the boys did not return. And the community committee decided to dig out that stone and put a monument. And they came with bulldozer, and they put a monument with the names of all these boys that were digging that stone, and they did not return, including Tamar, and Zvika, and Nimrod, and Matityahu, and all 6 of them, and Tamar was the 7th. By the time they dug the stone, they found there is beneath it another stone. And that was the other stone that became a monument for all the settlers of the Moshav, of the people that settled in Yarkona. As they died one by one, their name was put on here. And the last one was my father that died, and he was 93 years old. And guess what? When they dug the two stones, the 2 rocks out, they found a cache of coins. And the coins, immediately they knew that they came upon a very important tale, an archaeological place. And scholars from Jerusalem came, and they said these are the Roman coins, and it's from the 1st century. And that is the reason that it became so important in my life. I became really a scholar of the 1st and 2nd centuries, and many people are tired to hear me talk about it because I always want to read more and to learn more. And many times I used to feel as if I walked on the land that my ancestors of 2,000 years ago, they lived there and used these coins. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the story.
My life during World War II, 1939 to 1945. Catherine Mary Weitzel Williamson, G minor. North Wales, Pennsylvania was a small town when we moved there from Philadelphia in 1939 when I was 9 years old. We rented a large old house on the main street, right where it crossed the railroad track. Next door was the Lutheran church and manse. At night I lay in bed and listened to the trains. In the distance, the clackety-clack was very slow. As the train approached our crossing, the clackety-clack became faster and faster. When the train crossed the intersection, the sound gradually became slower and slower, until I could hear it no more. Televisions were invented, but because of the war, were not available for general home use. We listened to the radio. Mainly, I listened to shows like Fibber McGee and Molly, Red Skelton, Jack Benny, The Shadow, and others of that genre. I couldn't help hearing the news by Walter Winchell or Walter Cronkite. The news was that London was being bombed by the Germans every evening, killing hundreds and ruining homes, businesses, and churches. Above all, the bombs were killing children my age. The English children were being parted from their families and moved to northern England in the countryside, or to the USA to live with American families they did not previously know. My empathy was with these children. I did not want to leave my home, my school, and my parents. Lying in bed listening to the train soon became the past. Instead, I listened for airplanes. And if a plane did mysteriously fly over North Wales, I went into a panic. It could be a German plane bombing us. Looking back on it now, I wonder about the wisdom of worrying about having North Wales bombed. It was a small town with nothing that the enemy would want to eliminate, but it seemed very real to me then.
My name is Ethan, and I took this story because it reminded me of my grandfather who died a few days after World War II.
Hi, my name is Mickey, and I'm a children's librarian. My childhood was complicated. I was born September the 10th, 1944, and you all know what was happening then, the Second World War. My father was stationed in the Army in Hawaii, and my mother was living in California. My daddy wasn't with her when I was born. He never made it home. 9 months later, in June of 1945, a sniper's bullet took his life. We never saw each other. We never touched each other. We never even had a conversation. I have no personal memory of my dad. I just know pictures and stories from my family. My mother returned to her small hometown, Columbus, Mississippi, when I was a year old. Her high school boyfriend, it seems, was waiting for her to come home. They married. He adopted me, and I became Mickey Story. Great name for a librarian. It must have been my destiny, a lover of books, a dreamer of stories, and a believer in make-believe. If you know anything about children, you know what you're like at 6 is what you're going to be when you're 56. 66. I'm almost 76, and my whole life I've been that same kid. Here's one of my fondest memories of that childhood. The highway runs right through the center of our little town. It's a beautiful southern town with a wide boulevard down the middle. That highway that comes into our town from somewhere and goes out of our town to some other place. I figured I could go places on that highway. Being a fanciful child, I imagined if I practiced enough and spent enough time singing and dancing on that beautiful boulevard, a Hollywood movie producer just might be driving through my town on his way to someplace important, and he would discover me and put me in the movies. Can you just imagine a little kid singing and dancing her heart out, walking on that boulevard, oblivious stares of the neighbors? That is the truth. I really did do that. It didn't happen, but here I am 70 years later. I'm still telling stories at story time, singing and dancing and acting in puppet shows. I'm maybe waiting for somebody in the audience to discover me, put me on TV. How much are you like that kid you were when you were 6?
I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, in a family with 10 children. I was the fourth born. We lived for a time in a house up on top of the hill, a great big house with a wraparound porch. My father's mother, grandmother, we didn't call her that, we called her My. My mother later told me we called her My because when we were little and we would cry, she would rock us and say, My, my, my. My was a little short woman, about as wide as she was tall. She'd come visiting from Houston from time to time. My stepmother would make the most wonderful dinner you could ever imagine, and we'd all gather around the table. And then we children, the dishwashers, would wash all the dishes, and we'd gather out front on the wraparound porch. After a time, Mai would come out of the front door, slam the screen door behind her, and come and settle herself at the edge of the rocker glider. We would all be quiet because we knew what was coming. Mai was a storyteller. She carried a little bag by the side of her hip there, and before she would start to tell, we'd all settle down nice and quiet, and she'd pick that bag up. It was tied up with ribbons, and she'd loosen the ribbons, and she'd open the bag, and she'd dig down into the bag to see what was in there. She never let us touch that bag. She would pull the ribbons tight, hang it back at her hip, and say, "Now I've got my story." And then Mai would commence to some of the best storytelling you ever heard. We were amazed. It was wonderful. Such sweet memories. Now, when Mai would come, like I told you, there were 10 children in the house. And so there weren't any extra bedrooms. She would sleep in my bed, and I would sleep on a cot in the same room, but off to the side. And at night when she would sleep, she'd get up in my bed, and she'd take that story bag, and she'd put it on the bedside table, and she'd get all down, all comfortable in the bed, and she'd fall asleep. I'd look at the story bag, but I didn't dare touch it. But as the years passed, as Mai would come to visit and sit out on the front porch and tell her stories, I got to be older, and I got to be a teenager, sort of, and I began to wonder what she got in that bag. So one night when Mai was visiting and she was out on the front porch telling the stories, I couldn't even listen to her story because all that was in my head is, what's in that bag? That night while she slept, I lay down on my cot. The moonlight came in through the window, and you could see it shining there, and the bag seemed to call out to me. I snuck over as quietly as I could, and I picked up the bag, and I pulled the ribbons, and I opened it up, and I began to... All she had in that bag was some leaves and some feathers and some sticks, and there weren't any stories in that bag. I pulled the ribbons and I set it back on the bedside table, and I went back to my cot and I went to sleep. The next night, after dinner, after dishwashing, we all gathered on the front porch. Mai came out to the screen door, slammed that door, settled at the edge of the rocker glider. It's time for stories. She reached for her bag and she pulled the ribbons, and someone's been into my story bag, she said. She hung it back at her side, and there was no storytelling that night. The next morning, Mai was getting ready to go back to Houston. And as she kissed me goodbye, She whispered in my ear, "There's something under your pillow." I went in my room and I reached under the pillow after she was gone and I pulled it out. It was the story bag. She'd left it for me. I've got that bag sitting on a special shelf right now in the living room with all my storybooks. She gave it to me. That magic of storytelling. Grandma's story bag.
My name is Marissa, and I chose my story because I thought it was interesting.
My name is Sharon, and I'm here to tell a story of perhaps the strangest week that occurred throughout my childhood. My age at the time was 14. Bear in mind, again, this only lasted 1 week. My story began when my younger sister, who is 5 years younger than I am, arrived at the door home from school because she got home from school after I did. And at the time she arrived, all I was doing was watching television. I was involved in what I was doing. And when I heard the bell ring, I went to answer the door. It was my sister. And then the strangest words came out of my mouth. There was no thought to them. There was no preparation. I have no idea why I said it. And the words I said to my sister was, "Tante Malka just died." By the way, Tante is the Yiddish word for aunt, and Malka just a traditional Yiddish name. Did I know Tante Malka? I met her about 5 years ago, 2 times in my life, and she meant nothing. I have no idea why I said it. So my sister, of course, started pressing me. "What are you talking about, Sharon? What happened? Who called? Where's Mom?" Mom wasn't home at the moment. And I had no answers. I had absolutely no answers why I said it. Then, fortunately, my mother came home, so then my sister could nag my mother instead of me because I had no idea what was going on. And my mother said, "What is this about? Who called?" And I said, "Nobody." And she said, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "I have no idea what's going on." And then I said another crazy thing. I said, "But don't worry about it because Uncle Moe will be coming by tomorrow." And my mother said, "Well, did he call?" And I go, No. And those were not days of coming by. These things did not happen casually. But the next day, when my Uncle Moe died, this started getting scary. Now, the name of this is Truth and Lies, and I didn't know whether I was even living in the truth or living in a lie. This was just way too strange. I was 14. I couldn't comprehend any of this because I didn't do this. Just make up things, especially about things like this. Then Uncle Moe came to deliver the news that Tante Malka died. Okay, then it's getting a little weird for me. So what my brother and sister do is decide to test me with cards. Oh my goodness, I mean, it was just too bizarre. The ending of this story, though, became a friend, and we know what that means when it's a boy at age 14, who I wanted to hear from, called me. Oh, by the way, called me from a phone booth. That's how we did it when I was 14. And he called me, and I said to him, "I am having the strangest week of my life. These things are happening. I don't mean to be making up stories. I don't mean to be telling this stuff, and these words are just falling out of my mouth. And he laughed at me and he said, "Oh, Sharon, you are so silly and dumb tonight." And I said, "Oh, no, 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 no. You shouldn't have said that. Something bad could happen from saying that to me at this point." And I later found out he left the phone booth and was bitten by a bee on the lip that caused a reaction that required medical attention. Well, this was all just so overwhelming to me, and the only good ending to this story was this whole experience went away after about a week. It never came back, where things jumped in my head, and it was just the strangest week of my life. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marty. I'm a World War II veteran, and I have a story to talk about that has meaning to me, and it might have meaning for children. It's about a little girl, about 12, 13 years old, who helped a bunch of other kids understand the meaning of war. I was in the infantry in Italy for 2-3 years, and we captured a village in Italy called Villa de Villa. That means house of houses. And in that town was a orphan asylum of about 30 to 40 children. The war had been all around that village, and in some parts of the village, and most of the children were understandably quite scared of these American soldiers coming into town with ladder guns and jeeps and things like that. And we took up, our headquarters was in the orphan asylum, and we got to know some of the children. But before we got to know them, they were very frightened of us. One young girl of about 13, who I got to know, began to talk with me and felt she could talk to the children and make them feel comfortable so that we could even feed them. They were afraid to come out of their basements to even have food, even though they were very, very hungry. She told them not to worry about us, and she spoke in Italian and assured them. And we stood by and marveled at how this child, who had been through some very bad scenes, was able to talk to and help children who were all less than 10 years of age, some 5 and 6, accept us and come and join our chow line and take our food and begin to sing, thanking us for the food that we gave them. It all adds up to one child helping other children to get over some bad things.
My name is Lewis. I picked the story because I thought that war is an important thing that you should discuss if it has any meaning.
One day I said to my husband, let's go out to the country and let's look for a duck for the children. I was Mother of the Year. So we went to every farmhouse and knocked on doors. Do you have a duck for sale? And nobody had a duck for sale. Finally, we found a house. We found a place, and they had a duck for sale. and they had a puppy dog. So we took both. Now we come home. We had a lovely home, and next door was an empty lot. They didn't build the house there, and we had a little dog house on the next door lot. We put the puppy dog and the duck together, and little by little we see the duck's rear end was getting rid of its feathers. That puppy dog was very cruel to that duck. And that duck, the neighbor didn't know we had a little duck. And that duck walked over to the neighbor's house at 6 o'clock every morning. And she said to me, I don't know, I hear a quacking at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that was our duck. Finally, the duck had no feathers. And we found a pond with a lot of ducks in the pond. And we put that duck in the pond, hoping that the parents of the other ducks will take care of this baby duck.
My name is Santiago, and I picked this story because I like ducks.